Thank you, Ingrid, and thank you, Peter, for that wonderful introduction. I don't think I've ever been introduced at a conference as a cool guy before, and I think my kids would probably take issue with that, but I should probably just quit while I'm ahead and announce my retirement now and not finish my presentation. But instead, what I'm going to do is what I described to Ingrid earlier this morning is a bit of a fan dance. The report that we're talking about will not be issued and finalized until the end of the month. So we'd like to give you a little sneak preview, and I've been asked to share some of the analysis and needs and recommendations from the water infrastructure area. And one of the reasons that we chose the water infrastructure area to focus on was because it's really hard to imagine having any kind of smart growth or any kind of growth in New Jersey if we don't have a reliable public supply of water and we don't have capacity to treat wastewater. And time and again, what we've really seen is that those are some of the obvious constraints to growth. So it makes sense to start there. Now, I guess what I'd really like to start with is by saying, in terms of the needs in the water infrastructure category, is that we've done a very good job here in New Jersey of cataloging our needs. We have reports, and we spend a lot of time kind of making lists of projects and doing what we can to fund those projects. But I have to give us only a fair grade of actually meeting the needs that we've identified. And the fact of the matter is that we're getting further and further behind in that effort each year. So the time to act really is now if we are going to have any hope not only of having New Jersey come out of the current recession, but really build a vibrant economy. And for years I've been subscribing to the theory that a strong economy is inherently and inextricably linked to a preserved environment, and I think that's really true in the water area. So we have a lot of work to do. So in terms of if you look at the slides, some of the selected needs, I mean, the fact of the matter is in the water supply area, we're actually losing a good chunk of our water right now because our infrastructure is aging. We're losing an estimated 20 to 22% of treated water into the ground. That's an obvious place to start. We need to address our stormwater management and CSO problems, particularly in our urban areas, because it's hard to attract new business when you have combined sewer overflows affecting your downtown business areas. We need to make sure we preserve the quality of our waters, and one of the ways we can do that is by purchasing additional watershed properties, both to protect existing water quality, but also to avoid the significant investments that would have to be made to build additional filtration plants. We need to have better oversight of our capital planning process, not just to catalog it and make lists of it, but to really kind of constantly go back and say, how are we doing on this? What have we been able to fund? Are the needs growing? Are we addressing it? Are we making progress or not? And in the water supply area, we definitely need to move forward and adopt the water supply master plan update as soon as possible. Let's talk about needs for a few minutes. The needs get pretty gigantic pretty quickly. We identified an overall total of about $36.6 billion in needs, and those are just using numbers from 2008. And these covered water supply, wastewater treatment, stormwater management together. EPA estimated there was an almost $8 billion need for capital investment over the next 20 years just in drinking water infrastructure. We have estimated, working with a lot of different advocacy groups, that just in terms of guaranteeing the preservation of water supplies, $250 million over the next 5 years. These are pretty daunting numbers. We do have some funding sources, so we're not without some ability to address some of these needs. And there are pending bills in the legislature right now looking at renewing a stable source of funding for open space. The watershed lands that we're talking about are really a subset of that, although those other open space and farmland preservation needs are certainly priorities. We don't view them as infrastructure needs per se, but the watershed lands and preserving additional watershed lands we thought was really an integral part of the infrastructure investments that we had to make, along with transportation and wastewater and electric needs. We do have an environmental infrastructure trust in New Jersey, and we can finance approximately $300 million a year in project costs. The that are part of the priority list. But if you look at that priority list, we've got a list of $533 million worth of projects. So again, we're getting farther and farther behind. We have, in the late 70s, the Reagan administration converted the federal construction grants program to a loan program, so we've been able to put out a lot of loan money. We probably need to do a better job using some of those returning loan monies and figuring out how to appropriately reprogram them to fund more of our projects. We have a Clean Water State Revolving Fund that provides low-interest loans. We have a state drinking water revolving fund, but we clearly have to find other ways to fund critical infrastructure needs, because we're just not doing the job right now, and every year that we get farther behind means the bill gets larger and larger and the infrastructure gets older and older. In terms of kind of a glimpse at some of the recommendations, I mentioned updating the water supply master plan. This has been particularly frustrating, I think, for anyone who works in the water supply area. This is a plan that's supposed to be updated, I think, every 5 years. It's long overdue for an update, and it needs to be done sooner rather than later. There are drafts, internal drafts, which actually we were not able to get copies of, so a lot of the numbers we're using are from either EPA or older state reports. I mentioned already strengthening the capital planning process, and we have to find a better way of integrating state plans with county and municipal plans, and looking at additional fees and additional ways to cover some of these, including developer fees, because a lot of the infrastructure investments we're going to have to make are going to have to first serve not only the existing populations but the proposed developments and redevelopments. We have to figure out a way to integrate the actual cost of development in the development approvals without making it too difficult to move forward and to redevelop our urban areas. I mentioned obtaining and increasing additional funds. I'm pleased to see Carter Strickland here. New York is one of the always one of the, I think, the best examples that I use in this area. New York City, and you heard Peter talk about the billions of dollars, billions of gallons of water they supply, has done an incredible job of making investments in preserving its watershed lands to avoid much larger investments in filtration plants. I mean, they worked out an agreement with EPA to basically postpone the need for filtration plants and get a chance to demonstrate that they could preserve water quality by purchasing land and purchasing easements in their watershed lands. So it's certainly something that can be done. We've made a good start on New Jersey, but we need to continue it. We also need to expand buyouts of particularly vulnerable flood-prone properties, because more and more with climate change and with the impact on New Jersey as a coastal state, that's going to be a bigger issue. And it makes no sense to continue to redevelop areas that are damaged and damaged and damaged again. We can expect that will happen more frequently and the damage to be even more severe. So it's time to come to grips with a process that says, where does it make sense to redevelop and rebuild? Where does it not make sense? And how can we work with nature to provide some measure of protection for the areas that either can't be relocated, have to be rebuilt, and have to be protected more, and we have to make those investments there. That's going to be a challenging issue to face in a democratic society, but the time to wrestle with that is right now. As I said, our report will be out with many more details at the end of the month. I'd like to encourage you to learn more by signing up for our regular news brief, looking at the report when it comes out at the end of March. We hope that this report is really the beginning of a serious dialogue on what needs to be done. We've tried, each of us in the Facing Our Future group has been in the hot seat in government or in some senior management position related to government. The report is intended not to be a criticism of our colleagues who are wrestling with, frankly, virtually impossible problems. It's meant to be a wake-up call and to try and make their job a little easier by advising the citizens in New Jersey that however you feel about where things are going, it's time to take the reins and really make the investments in infrastructure before it is too late to do that. It is not too late now, but we need to really, as a society, come to grips with how we're going to pay for the necessary improvements. Because if we don't make them now, they're going to be even more expensive in the future, and our options will get smaller and smaller. And the places in not only across the United States, but in other countries that are biting the bullet and making those improvements. We'll have a competitive advantage over states like New Jersey, and it'll be harder and harder to catch up in the future. Our next two speakers, Carter Strickland and Harriet Tregoning, are from two people from organizations that have done exactly what this report suggests. They have found a way, even in the face of serious economic downturn, to make the infrastructure investments necessary. I know that they're going to talk more about that, and I'd like to ask Carter to join us now. Carter?